Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Ed Chandler, and we're going to talk about project success or fiasco.
Can you hear?
1, 2.
Testing 1, 2.
1, 2.
1, 2.
We're all good.
All right, there we go.
Coffee.
Good day, group. Every one of us in this room, I betcha, has a case where when you expected to see one thing go this way or that, it kind of went that way. Anybody here doesn't have that case? Oh, okay. All right. I love you there. That's perfect.
Mr.
I saw them at the bar last night.
Yeah, well, that's it.
We solved all the problems last night.
We have a great panel here.
Sorry.
And I'm technically the moderator, and so I'll try to talk less. I'm also not going to spend a long time introducing everybody. I'm going to have them each do a quick introduction of what they are, so really short. So we'll go through that, and then we'll talk a little bit about what our subject is, and we've got some sea stories for you. So there we go. So Brad, let's talk about you.
Good morning. I'm Brad Wilson with RFI Communications Security Systems. We're a systems integrator based on the West Coast. Actually in the same neck of the woods as Security by Design. We have 4 offices. Been in business 40 years, just celebrated our 40th anniversary, about 200 employees, and based in Silicon Valley with offices in Seattle, Reno, Nevada, and Sacramento, California. I'm happy to be here.
Jay.
Be gentle with me. I'm the integrator, so I know that
It's always the integrator's fault.
that's blame it on the integrator.
Right. Jay.
Kelly Stewart with Newcastle Consulting. Been in this industry for about 30 years, doing the consulting gig for about 5 to 6. Mainly based in Washington, D.C. We do international work, concentrating on assessments, as well as executive protection and security building design. Glad to be here. Glad to talk about all the trials and tribulations.
And one of the things you didn't say is you've kind of been everybody.
So yeah, with regard to this whole thing, I've been an integrator. I've also been chief security officer and now consultant. So good perspectives on all fronts.
There you go. Jerry.
Hi, I'm Jerry Blanchard. I'm with Protus 3. Our legal name is Risk Management Associates, if those are older that know us. Been around 31 years in Raleigh, North Carolina. We support the entire world. I mean, we do have projects all over the world. I've been on board since 1995. I came out of the military and have been in the corporate world a little bit. So had the opportunity to see pretty much all sides, not been in the integrator world yet. But we'll see how that works out. Yeah. I'm getting a little gray for that. We'll see. Anyway.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to approach this from kind of a sea story. I was in the Navy, so we use that term, sea stories there. You know the difference between a fairy tale and a sea story, right? Fairy tale, once upon a time, and a sea story is, this is no shit. So we're going to do some sea stories. I'm going to do the first one. It's really quick. So it was a dark and stormy night. No, anyway. And it was 1 a.m. and I'm in Seattle in a hotel room, and I'm getting on a meeting for Dublin, Ireland. And we had a system, one that's been around, a long time, and this is a long time ago. And I've got 15 people on the other end of this meeting, and they're saying that the panels keep going offline. And I said, well, okay, so what are you doing? Well, we just power it up, we reboot it, and it comes back, but it goes offline again, and it won't stay up for even a day. And so they're saying this is bad stuff. Well, we had those panels worldwide, they're working perfectly, and I tell them, I said, the only thing that'll do that is you either don't have your grounding right or you've got spikes in the system and there's something wrong. Now, this is Ireland, right? So if you know about the EU, it's called, they use CE. CE is like our UL, right? It has to meet CE code, but they think we're dumber than the UL guys think we are. And the reason they do that is because they say, okay, if you're going to put out a coil there, you got to solve spikes, and you might put plus on one end of the coil and minus on the other end, or you might swap it. Whereas in the US, we assume that you always put the plus on the plus side and the minus on the minus side. So in the US, we can use various devices, including diodes, to stop what's called a spike. And a spike is when you have a coil and you've got a car and you want to make a spark in your spark plug, you put power on it, and when you take the power away, the coil collapses the magnetic field and it comes back and it sends like a 1,000-volt spike down, and the spark sparks and your car runs. That's how it works. So we have coils in locks. A lot of them are left over because people are putting motors in locks these days, which is very good for our industry, by the way. All right, so it turns out that what happened is, in this case, right, because who's the contributor to somebody has a problem? Who's the contributor? So this is going to that point. So I had a lock supplier that thought that our specification was a mistake, because in Ireland they mostly use 12-volt locks and not 24-volt locks. So they supplied 12-volt locks, and on a 12-volt lock they put back-to-back Zener diodes, which are things that avalanche when you get above a certain thing, and for a 12-volt lock they put 18-volt Zeners on back-to-back. So if the spike comes in, it just sucks through those diodes and doesn't ever go onto the system, right? Well, in this case, they put in all those 12-volt locks. We only had 3 doors out of 50 or 60 on the site that they wanted to keep unlocked during the day. And so they put those locks unlocked during the day. The Zeners burned up, the coils burned up, because we had 24 volts coming out of the power supplies that were feeding these locks. And they found them and they said, oh, they smoked. You know, so we fixed those 3. I said, oh, okay. And so how did you do it? Well, so what they did is they took out the 24-volt power supplies and put in 12-volt power supplies. But it turns out that every solenoid in every lock of that system was burned up, right? The diodes were burned up. And so they were all spiking. Every time you unlocked the door, there was a spike coming back into the system, and the system was dropping offline. So I said, just put the 24-volt power supplies back in, change all the solenoids out. And they said, this is never going to make it work right. And I said, yes, it will. And it did. So where did that one come from? That one came from a guy that was trying to help me with my mistake of saying 24-volt solenoids, and he put in 12-volt solenoids. And we had a thing where everybody's going crazy, and they've been working on this for a month before they called me, you know? So that's a sad state, but there you go. So there are contributors in every case, right? And what could go wrong, right? This list is alphabetical. I think I did it right. So I put us at the bottom, right? But we all contributed, right? So I guarantee you, there's nobody in this room that hasn't been a contributor to the what can go wrong problem. I guarantee it. We all do it. But where does it start? Really quickly, an architect, and somebody else was telling me this, I forget who, yesterday. They were telling me about a case where the architect set up an egress path through a skiff. All right, so, what can I say? So, which one of you wants to take the first C story?
I'm the big guy here. I've got a lot of them. So, what Ed shared and Ray, there's, as an integrator, you're playing these different theaters, right? So is it the new construction, compression, acceleration? Is it the museums that you're dealing with people that are maybe not as technically astute? Is it just migrations that are going on? And so I probably, knowing that there's a lot of folks in the room, but I would say a simple, easy one is migrations, because we seem to be doing quite a few of those. Things are, we're moving out from one platform to another. There's obviously a gap analysis that occurs where we're starting out to put this thing in play. And the quick thing we learned is the more stakeholders, the bigger the project becomes and the slower it becomes and the more money is expended. So we start out more projects now with, and I'll fly back to this, but not just the project plan, but the implementation plan. And then we took something out of our fire business, and we do a lot of fire alarm, life safety work, and put an impairment plan. And those of you that are involved in life safety systems impairment plans, how do I egress out of different areas? And that impairment plan was, it starts to become very critical, because when you lay those 3 plans and look for a matrix, how many names really appear across all 3 of those plans as stakeholders? And when the impairment plan says, here's what could go wrong, I don't see all the names that start out on the project team or the implementation plan to end up on the impairment plan or the what could go wrong, how do we fix this? And so the rule of thumb is, we're at the end of the long rope. And so I'll go back now to 2 little quick stories. One is the one, and both of these happen to be in the university. We also do a lot of healthcare and higher ed. And those of you who do higher ed know that you sit around a table with many stakeholders, and who has the biggest club? I can answer, I think, that question. It's called housing. The people that control the revenue for the students to get in. So we were doing a project and up in the Bay Area. And what happens is that they realize, and we're going down these corridors, and everyone's going into the dorms, and they realize that it was a retrofit, and they had the ceiling gutted, and they were doing HVAC work. Somewhere along the line, they realized that the ductwork or the dampers were not correctly reflected in terms of size. So when the electrical starts to come in with tray, and as you guys probably folks know now, we do a lot of open ceilings, paint, everything, J-hooks, threaded rods, very expensive. But in this case, it was a dorm, and they said, yeah, we got a problem. Problem is we can't, do the electrical and get the rest of the raceways in because the HVAC is blocking. Now we got code issues. And there wasn't a lot of, space up above. And they said, okay, well, what kind of impact is that going to be? And they started calculating out the day. Says, well, students are moving in. I mean, literally, you may know, they have boxes, parents are there, they're dropping off. So what was on the table was, we've already contacted these hotels, and they will put up our students across, and I don't know if you've been to the Bay Area recently and stayed at a hotel, but even Hampton Inn's about 3 1/4, right? And you're thinking, what goes on here? But so the point is, and they made it very clear, you know what, we're back charging everybody. So had nothing to do with it that we're back charging everybody, because everyone's got to take a piece of the little bit of skin in the game. So the problem was, we're at the end trying to get our cabling in, do our devices. There's readers, there's cameras, obviously, and hallways, because dorms are pretty compact, not as bad as the Northeast. But so the point is, they ripped the carpet up. And over the weekend, they stenciled the entire HVAC ductwork layout on the concrete floor. And they went floor by floor to say, then the HVAC guys came right in, like down this corridor, they're walking it and they're assembling it, and every other trade's following behind. And so what happens is that the consultant wasn't really a blame, or no one's really, we're all in it together. And I think that's really the message we want to walk away from, is that we're all in it together, and there is a lot of costs involved. But we were able to, and the consultant, when these construction jobs go on, and we're dealing with a lot of construction in the tech world, it's not a blame avoidance thing. It is, we're all going to take a little bit of financial hit on this. And it becomes labor. And I know there's some sessions with labor that's occurring now as well, but the burden cost of labor is extremely high. And that leads us to a lot of hours to make things right. So to give you an example, and doing a little research, annually 4 to 11 billion in National Council of Arbitration, Litigation, Resolution of Construction Claims. Annual spend. So it's a lot of money. And when you're putting out labor, and we're an integrator, and we're putting people out there, or projects just run along, it's a problem. So you got to be creative in finding ways to get things communicated very quickly. And sometimes you're figuring out on the job. And that's unfortunate, but that's how it works. The second scenario that was kind of more tied to the consultant would be a high-tech company where they're very concerned about their IDFs. And we've already we moved the IDF on you, right? And it's not here now, it's over here in the electrical room type scenario. But in this case, the IDFs is a problem. And they said, we got to secure the IDFs, and the network's not in. They said, do a local area network, secure the IDFs. Now, everybody's in and out of the IDFs, right? And they're propping the door open, and then it's just madness. And when you deal with tech companies, money really, although it's an issue, if you can make it happen in that time, they'll pay. So now it's, can you physically put the work in, working 24/7, fatigue, compression? I mean, they don't, you have enough labor to make that happen, and they push you very hard. So we've been working with trying to think about these impairment plans again, but also the IDFs, and then we give them the token, and we could do some other, type cloud-based things if we can get up there and get a link. But we find ourselves at the mercy of the network many, many times. And I don't know how you fix that today. You pull them in early, you try to do stuff, but they think once they're good, we're good. And it's a problem, and it's a big problem. And I don't see it going away with the collaboration and all the different trades that are now, programs that are now coming into this ecosystem. And that becomes problematic. So the critical path, and in this case, the consultant worked with us and said, okay, we can do this. And we had the program. Typically, when you're doing the program, you know how that's going to load. But to put some things in as a contingency, if network is down or not available, here's what we do. And we've had success in doing that with limited people getting into that IDF. And that's helped us control the egress and activity in there, and also the workspace confinements. Because he who gets there first, there's no place for a room for you to do your work, and that's a problem. And that's really something the consultant can't, I think, maybe foresee, because you're looking at milestones, but that's where the impairment plan comes in. If this occurs, what do we do? And then just the migrations alone with certain hardware manufacturers and a lot of manufacturers community, there's some dicey things going on between firmware and unique boards. And when you start to give up some functionality, because I need an LED light to come on 1,500 card readers, and I've got to visit 400, ECUs and make that happen, and I have to give something else. I hope that F2F wiring, or I had that extra, wire there, or I can drive an output to make that LED work. And that simple thing is an LED. And the functionality. So it all boils down to the functionality and expectation. But I know these guys are chomping the bit for big war stories and sea stories and
so
things.
On the LED, all you got to do is use OSDP, and you don't need to worry about it anymore. It's very easy, right?
Very easy, right?
Right.
OSDP.
Jay.
Sure.
OSDP.
Brad hit the nail on the head in terms of the setting expectations piece. I'm going to give you a little story centered around that setting of expectations, a lot of it on project management, quite frankly. And what ties into what Mr. Wilkins said as our keynote, how project management is key, so is collaboration and communication. So it's going to hit both ends, both when I was an integrator as well as when I'm a CSO. So first, let's start with the CSO piece of what I did. I came in, deal with the system, deal with sites on a limited budget, and then figure out how am I going to do this design and make sure that it's effective and it's operationally sound, and obviously it works for us. So we had to do the research, our team had to do the research to figure out what's going on. So let's also then take a step back, go 10 years prior when I was an integrator, and I had bid this site that I was now working at as their CSO. And I lost the project by $500,000. So I opened up the kimono, I start looking and researching things, and I find out, well, the total project cost was $3.5 million. So obviously a lot of scope creep, a lot of change orders, a lot of unknowns. And then, oh, by the way, I find no drawings. I have to actually physically go around and see where all the card readers are, all the cameras are, all the raceways, everything. None of that was recorded. And then on top of that, the architect is in Australia. So as a CSO, I have all this, but I only have $1 million in my budget to not only deal with my guard force, but also redo 30 sites. So what do I do with that? So it was working with a consultant, working with an integrator, but on a larger scale. Because the integrator was supposed to take care of us globally, and that simply wasn't going to happen. Because if you know, with integrators, it's all local. It is not national or global, at least not in my experience. So how do we manage that project? How do we go through things? Did we look at the design first with the end in mind as, okay, this is what we want to go to from an enterprise, but then can the locals have that designed correctly? And can it be operational for us when we do this? And we all got the bunch of widgets, but it also goes to Brad's point of, okay, how's this financially going to go? And will we be able to pay everybody at the end of the day so that we don't have delays in the project? So again, go in the scope. What's the scope of the project? What's the time factors? What's the cost? And we did not meet any of those, quite frankly, as an organization. So we had to trench back, relook at the entire scope, and then go building by building by building. So my point in this whole thing is, what exactly do you know about the project that you're going into? How much information can you glean from it? What other people are you going to hold accountable? And you have to hold them accountable. And it is, while it is a system that you're putting in place to help out the end user, well, how's that communication collaboration going? And given it's an electrical system, it fails. So what are you doing to help them out to understand what exactly is going to go on? So the consultant we had on our end walked me through the entire process. Now, given he was a former Secret Service colleague of mine, but we did things the way we'd gone through in advances. And we went every site and figured out, okay, what would make sense? And then we brought in the integrator, and they helped us out with all this. So it worked out in the end of the day, but guess how much the cost was for us to do all of that? We had to make the business case to justify a $7 million project.
Sounds about right.
Not a million.
There you go.
Not a million.
Not $1 million.
Jerry.
Fantastic. This is no shit. So I've got a little story as well. Piggybacking on some of this, and we'll talk a little bit about what we heard in the general session and from Will's discussion earlier. It is all about relationships. We know that. We're dealing with it every day. And this little story will convey that message. So in 2007, I had a meeting. So first of all, how many of you done state projects? State work. Okay, not too many. Federal work, it's a similar pain, just so you know. So it's a state project. And first meeting, November 2007, with the architect, owner, stakeholders for the stake in terms of building this facility. It's a half a million square foot facility, ultimately about 600 readers, 600 card cameras, various other components to it. Project going along swimmingly. We did a lot of pre-planning, got everything together, documents, the typical things that we do. Went really well. And moving along, went through the bidding process, assisted the GC, because the security integrator is going to work through the GC. Went through that process, found the integrator, superb integrator, everything's moving along fine. And about, this project was going to take about 4.5 years to complete. So it's a complex project. And probably about 3 years, 2.5 years in, the fire alarm contractor walks off. Then the electrical contractor walks off. And the next thing we're knowing, things are happening along the way. So we're seeing this. And next thing you know, the GC's bond gets pulled. So now we've got big problems. Mm-hmm. Now we've got the surety's involved and that sort of stuff. So what does surety do? The surety, they go out and find another GC to run the job. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. So what do? They hire the same GC to finish the job. So they're going to get paid twice for the same job. Not a lot of fun. Okay, incompetence to start with, incompetence continue. So a lot of fun, but at that point, you're in for a battle all the way through the remaining of the project. Fast forward, 2017, we commissioned the job.
That quick math is 10 years, right?
Yes.
Just
Just quick math. So we just finished. And so it was a hard slug project. But the great thing about how things worked out for us and for the owner, we had great documentation in the beginning. We knew exactly what we wanted to have. Were we perfect? No, we're not perfect. We moved along. The architect was great. Everybody stood in place and worked hard together to push this to the finish line. And as we got to the finish line, it took a long time. The resources were stretched thin. The owner was, and this is a state, was good enough to help support us through the way in terms of helping us a little financially. Wasn't one for one, if you will. We had to eat a little bit as we moved forward, but we were able to do that. And that goes to our brand, our relationships, and what we do moving forward. That's how this happened. So I say all this, we finished this job, and the great thing is we still have great relationships with that customer to the point, this is no shit. 1 year, so the state had to build 2 facilities. They're identical types of facilities. They were going to be designed and built 1 year apart. So they executed the second building. I was attending the first meeting in 2008, November of 2008. Would you know it? They picked the same GC. Now, they hadn't had all the problems yet.
right.
So they didn't know what they were in for. So that's 2008. We are still not through with that building.
Oh, man.
This is in the western part of the state of North Carolina.
What's the project scope?
What's the project scope?
The building.
Side,
Building.
about 500,000 square feet. It's a forensics psychological facility. And it was complicated. And anyway, it was an interesting project. This is still an interesting project. We haven't gotten to the legal side of it yet.
That's coming.
That's coming. So we've been advised by all lawyers to maintain all data, those kind of good things. So even a record holding and all that sort of things. I mean, you got to make sure you're prepared for the long fight. Fortunately, we have the state that's willing to help us. Yes, sir.
Have you had the general contractor and the project stakeholder come to blows in a meeting yet?
Not physical, but close. Very close.
I actually was
very close.
I was in a meeting, 11 of us standing around the table, and the project manager for this, it was a city contract, and the general contractor come to blows, and we're also there going, now what do we do?
Now what do we do? Do we call the police? How do we deal with this?
Absolutely.
So great relationships, document, and maintain. And it's all about relationships.
So I'm going to ask when we do take questions, I'm going to hand the microphone out next time. So we'll do that. And that gets the better recording so that when somebody else wants to go back and see the session, you can see it. All right, I've left this slide up here for a minute because there's probably others that need to be on this list, right? I don't think it's complete. I mean, general contractors, subcontractors, there's a lot of players in a new construction or a big retrofit project, a lot of players. Somebody asked me one time, this is a big campus, you're a consultant, how do you start? And I said, I start with egressing, right? That's me. I always start with egressing because if that works, then you're not egressing through a skiff and you're not trying to lock a door that can't be locked. And so I call that play security. If you've got a door that's a locked door and it's unlocked by the fire alarm based on the UBC or the International Building Code and that one part of Chapter 10 that gives you all those things you have to do to lock a door that's an egress path door, then you might as well not lock it, really. I mean, it's pretty bad, in my opinion. And so you start with the architect, and you work with the architect. The end users, some of them are much more familiar with life safety codes and other things than others. A lot of them just want a building and they think that you can just lock whatever. General contractors have to manage the project. And so on the general contractor status, you can see where they might take a step to speed up or enhance or lower the cost or whatever, value engineer something that could come back to haunt us. And I think we've all found that, right?
Yeah.
So the value engineering case. There are lots of opportunities for general contractors to have the environment different than what it was, right? Integrators, they're challenged by lack of good resources and techs. They're challenged by when we do make them bid a project, then they're trying to keep their numbers tight so their contingencies go down. And then when something happens and we look at them, they go, well, yeah, but, you know. So they've got a lot of challenges. And they're our savior in this industry because they're the ones that make it happen. And so, you know, I love Brad. I've done a lot of work with him for a long time. Great. And all the rest of you guys in here. I've called Jim Henry on a Sunday, I know. And
Does he love you too, Jim?
Just like, yeah, right? Okay. And then manufacturers. And we can tell a lot of stories about manufacturers. Manufacturers are having to change who they are in today's world. And so if you go back, say, 5 years, then I can't tell you more than 1 or 2% of my clients or integrators that are interested in or willing to put the next release of software on when it comes out. Right? Everybody goes, oh no, I'm waiting for Service Pack 1. I'm waiting for it to stabilize. I want to be one behind. That's 5 years ago. And then there are all these folks out there that are hacking the world, and the cyber world is changing. And now the concept of using the current OS, the current version of this, the current version of that, is where we have to be. And we have to grow up as an industry and move to that current state. But we can no longer depend on the concept that we'll let other people vet the product for a while before it happens. So that's causing churn. And that churn is something that we're starting to live with more and more. So we're now at a point where we're using manufacturers, right? Mm-hmm. In a case where they're giving us new stuff that we're putting in place. And sometimes it's not quite vetted to the state we hope it would be vetted to. And we've all been there. So manufacturers. Subcontractors, obviously, lots of opportunities there. It's the door guy, it's the lock guy, it's the who knows what, right? And then the supplier chain, and the supply chain can be its own magic bullet, right, for what we're doing. And then we, the consultants, and so we're all part of this, okay? So if we were to, Brad, pick your highest offender there, and I'm putting you on the spot, but not with names, but of your if you went back and took it by, not by value of dollars or value of doors, but maybe pain threshold, right? Which is the one that's hardest to resolve from your perspective?
You know, I would probably say manufacturers. You know, I think, and I being 36 years in the integrator space, so it's really, I've got a limited view on like some other folks, but you know, we see the velocity of the industry moving very quickly. The integrators being outpaced by the technology. We all in the Bay Area, other places, not like the Bay Area, but the labor is tight. So you got to ramp up and onboard and teach and train folks, because if you don't, you can't control your product, your reputation, the fabric, the cloth that you wear every day that's so important to you. So I find that, you know, and you bring up a good point, Ed, that under the veil of vulnerability or cyber, and I'm not saying that's a veil, I'm just saying that, you know, that's a driver, that's a business driver, then possibly things get a little sideways. And what I'm seeing occur, which is okay from some integrators, is the manufacturers recognizing the integrator channel can't keep the pace, maybe articulate the solution. So they're talking directly, which is totally cool, and I encourage that. And we said in things like Security Exchange and others, it really does create a backdrop for that. But what is occurring in terms of expectations between the manufacturer community and the owner or end user? And that's where we first have to, as an organization, as a group, a team, figure out where those expectations lie. Because sometimes what means something to you means something different to me. And the guy who's doing the takeoffs in the engineering department, they don't care, don't know. It's, it's like, here's the bill of materials, here's what's the intent. And part of that is, how do you ramp up, to your point earlier, what's the overall intent? And forget acquisitions, different things happen. I think we're just not clearly communicating expectations. And there's really not a knowledge base today that I know of, and we were talking about this earlier. Where do I go as an end user, or even the integrator that says, I can go here and get the data, the knowledge base on this technology and how it integrates with others and other products or solutions? I don't know, if there's one single knowledge base for that. I think there's opportunity to create those things, but I don't think that exists per se today. General contractors, it's about the money. Never lose sight of that. It's about the money. But manufacturers can be a great ally, and we have good relationships with manufacturers because they do control our fate at some point. And it's the velocity, the technology, the labor force. It's hard to put your arms around that. So we could talk all day about communications and trust and a trusted, people that, the funny thing is, and I'll get off my rant, but as we get into the e-builders and the procures and all this construction software, NetSuites of the world, it's all out there, right? And you see your swim lane. But I think people just don't really look out for the other teammate. I'm not getting paid for it. If I say something, and then if I'm not engaged, I'm viewed as a blame avoidance guy, or if I'm engaged, or the people that engage because they have a big title on their card, and they use words sometimes that aren't simple. Honest to goodness, words. We were talking about words in your interview, right? But words are important. And if you're using them to intimidate the rest of the project team, that leads to misunderstandings. Trust me.
Yeah.
I didn't interpret it that way. Why'd you use that big word?
Kelly.
So, I look at actually four of them: architects, end users, general contractors, and us as consultants. Not saying that it's a problem. It's a collaboration problem. It's a communication problem, setting expectations issue. But also, and in a general question for the crowd, how many of you start off with an assessment to look exactly what the landscape is, how you baseline this whole thing, and then do you go back to the end user and client and say, listen, here's what you want to have, here's what we uncovered, this is kind of the pathway we got to go down. Are you okay with that? And then go to Brad's point on the definitional piece. Well, are we educating them? Are we educating them on what they're really going to have, how this design is going to work for them, and is it going to be effective? The other aspect is, well, if we're not assessing the whole thing, if we're just throwing widgets up, what does that mean really to their business? And are we looking at them from a business aspect? Forget security. We know all about security. How are we helping them maintain their business? How are we helping them ensure that whatever they do, at the end of the day, they're being profitable, they're keeping people employed, and they're happy with what we do? And it also goes, do we care about our team? The biggest piece of any of this, again, going back to the project management, your resources, if you don't keep your team in mind, then what do you do? If they're all going to walk off a job, one story with regard to this. So what would you do if you had the federal government come to you and shut down your project because of a national security issue? Again, it goes to who you know, how you communicate, what does that mean to the end user, what kind of trouble are you in? So case in point, when I was working for a company, we had people who went over they wanted the Chinese to come in and reside in our building, and it was the embassy. And so the facility person and me were communicating this back and forth. I was like, that just can't happen. The liability that we're going to have is ridiculous. Oh, and by the way, we put classified satellites up in the air. So, of course, with the Chinese, typically what they have an intel guy on every kind of project or any kind of deal they go into. And then they got trinkets coming back from this meeting. I said, well, hold on. I need to see those trinkets because I need to have them looked at. I'm like, what do you mean? They were gifts. Just trust me on this. So I go back to folks that I know, and we come back and say, all of them have bugs. We can't use any of this. Federal government finds out, of course, it was reported by state and the Secret Service, and then our project gets shut down completely, not only from redoing our security, but also from even entertaining the fact that these folks were going to look into space in our building. But then this goes back to the CEO, and he had no idea we were doing this. So again, who's part of your team? Who understands and know what's going on? The financial hit of that to the organization was $2.5 million of lost business. And then, oh, by the way, we lost 2 classified contracts. So there's impacts all over, and how you present it is not from a security perspective. It is completely from a business perspective and how they want to operate, how they want to do business, and have you covered all your bases. And in my humble opinion, you start that off with assessing what they have and do they understand what they have.
One question.
Wait a minute.
I have to ask questions.
Sure.
So that's really loud.
It's on.
In today's scope, right? Yesterday Will talked about you're selling to the entire piece, right? The GPS on the trailers was a security aspect, but it was actually it was sold to HR and supply chain and all that. When you go in and do your risk assessments, you know that security has the smallest budget and it's going to be the first one that gets pulled. So as you're going in doing your risk assessments, are you also looking at it as a full business system and saying, okay, you as Mr. Security Director want to do cameras or whatever. Let's see, if you're doing a retail function within that, or they've got other pieces there. Let's have a conversation, and you end up bringing in more stakeholders, right? You cut out the ones you don't need, but you actually find more that you do need, and say, listen, marketing has a bigger budget, retail has a bigger budget, HR has a bigger budget. Let's tie these security functions into that. And so, as you're doing your risk assessments, are you also seeing now that the infrastructure, word changing, but basically the infrastructure of the community is changing. The business is changing.
How they do the business.
So now you have to grow your risk assessment to not only include that, but also to include where the money's coming from.
So I have a simple and complicated answer. My perspective on this. So when we go and say, I want you to do a cybersecurity assessment, I want you to do a physical security assessment. Well, they're all one and the same thing. You're either doing a thorough assessment or you're not. So anytime I get asked, well, we just want you to cover a physical security. Okay, I got to know how all this is attached to all the other stuff in the building, as well as how this affects the process of the business. So I got to understand the culture. I got to understand geography. I got to understand what they're doing as a community, where they're going in terms of a 5-year plan. I got to understand that business in addition to how's their cyber, operational, and physical pieces coagulate together, or do they? Are they in silos? Are they integrated properly? Or none of that exists? Now, why is that important? It's important from the perspective because you're creating a plan. You're putting together something of a design for them that's going to be effective for them to operate properly. And also, by the way, so they can do business and save on revenue or make revenue. So how do you do that without understanding what the business is all about? Given, is it time consuming? Absolutely. Do you get all the information that you need from the end user? No, you don't. So you have to find out ways how you bring that team together, how you talk to those stakeholders, how you collaborate with them and get all that data. Now, we have tools to get all the data for, sure, that's a tool. But it's also about those relationships that director or that person who's your point has with the rest of that organization. And are they the right people to be in that meeting? And can you bring that all together? And it evolves.
Yeah, it really evolves.
Because nothing is static in this. it keeps on, there's moving parts, but you got to have that relationship. And honestly, from, again, my perspective, it's based on that assessment.
So there's a guy
Operational.
over there that's going to do an assessment session here after this, right? So it's afternoon. So there's a thought, right? Jerry, who's your biggest pain points, or is there one that you can even?
Yeah, there's not just one. There are pieces in all of them. There are times when each one contribute to enough pain that we have to work
They
through.
make the list.
Yeah, they make the list.
They're the PETA.
Yeah, and it's and I say that because I can think of lots of projects that different ones have had different effects. From integrators to manufacturers, the GCs, of course, I just named those. End users. So part of the end user piece is having all the stakeholders, as we mentioned, at the table, because when you miss that critical meeting with understanding IT standards that you need to work with, that's going to be a problem. It will be a problem. But I'll piggyback on what you were saying about in the perfect world, we'd love to be able to do the assessment up front. But how many of you get that ninth inning, 2 out? Oh shit, where's security?
Yeah, right. There's a lot of those
Yeah,
going on.
okay. Now-
Now you're involved. They've already got the building built, or mostly built. We're in CD phase, or maybe late DD, and they're saying, "You guys secure it." Okay, great. So we'll do that sort of stuff, and we'll kind of back up and try to get that assessment in on a shoestring to kind of fill in the gaps and figure out what we've got. But we have to be upfront with the owner to say, "Okay, this is where we're starting. We may find gaps as we move forward because and create some issues because this is where we're starting." And you guys have been there, done that. We all know it. So that's some of my pieces.
And so when you listen to what they said, no, this is short, and then I'll hit you. When you listen to what they said, they talked about expectations, assumptions, perceptions, right? And we kind of boiled those down when we met before the session to those are the really key things to get straight, right? So if you're not in sync, you're not in sync. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some solutions that we have collectively, thought of as we go forward. But yes.
Okay, so I heard Brad say, you find yourself at the mercy of a network. We're working as a manufacturer. We're working on a global video replacement from on-prem to cloud, and the end user, the integrator, no one knows the network, and that's been the biggest challenge. I mean, any project that you're not one manufacturer operates the same on each network, right? So a lot of it's coming back on our engineering team, which we're working through. But how do you get through projects when end users don't know their own network and you're dealing with it while the project's being deployed? We're doing about 20 sites a week in 50 different countries, and it's all boiling down to the network. And at that point, they always think it's the product that's wrong.
Yes.
It's the product's fault.
Who wants to talk about how you figure out what the network is? You've already got the mic. You don't need
That's right. The simplest thing, and I think really is that when you get your lead sweat dog on the team, right? Is that an organizational person or an operational person? So is it organizational risk or operational risk? And I think we see with big data and the sessions that we're all going to participate in, our world is moving into, has been organizational risk. And compliance is one of the drivers up there, but compliance is key, right? So you have these compliance folks come in, and we do skiffs and 2050 projects, but I think if you've got to have a lead that's geared towards organizational risk, that's meeting with the C-level group regularly. An operational lead on the team or, stakeholder, I don't know that he gets the voice or gets his voice heard in some of those C-level meetings. And the more you can pull towards that organizational risk area, I think doors open, no pun intended, but you start to get where you need to go and get more buy-in from those stakeholders because it's an organizational risk.
Yeah. So Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I was just going to say, not everybody, and we deal with clients at every level, and I'm sure all of you do too. Not everybody's a Valero, like Will was stating. He has a large team, they have large infrastructure, they have standards, they have everything in place. Most of our customers aren't there. We know that. And that's what I think you're alluding to. And their IT is not as sophisticated as we would see at a Valero or Microsoft or anyone like that. They don't have that, but they may have some loose standards, and that's where I feel like we've got to get the core group, the professional services group out of the manufacturer and the owner IT group together. We can't speak it. I'm not an IT expert. I don't try to pretend to play one. If I need to get resources, I'll get the resources to do that. But the manufacturers, many of them today have their teams internally that will work together to help make sure we get those relationships built so that we can start putting things in the right place and hopefully mitigate some of those issues of it's not working because it's the product.
Right. So what we want to do is in the last few minutes, how do we resolve the situations with integrity, right? Because without that, we aren't successful. Success is the key. And what can we learn from these challenges? So I'll give you guys the first one that strikes me. It's a tool that we do as a consultant and try to position the timing relative to the project. So if you have a 7-year project, that's one thing. If you got a project where, okay, we got to open this container or this site or this something, and this is our goal date, right? That's our goal date. Then there's a lot that goes on a detailed level of scheduling in that process to get there, a lot. The question is, when we want to turn on that first piece of that project or that set, then how do we get there? And I can't tell you how many times the general contractor sees that he's a little behind and he's trying to make it work, right? And so now he's scared that the architect's gonna put blue tape on the wall next to that door so he doesn't bring the door when he's supposed to. And so he's trying to keep people from hurting the site or something. And so Brad's over there, or some integrators over there, John's group when he was doing that, and they're committed to making your date, but it's going to take them reasonably 10 working days from the time they start turning this door to the time they can turn the last door on and get it working and get it right. And the door or the lock isn't showing up until 3 days before the date. And that doesn't work. And now they're looking at security and they're going, oh man, this integrator is no good. They're not making our date and it's all their fault. So the tool that we do is we go in and we say, I want to micro-analyze the last 30 days of the project. I don't care about the prior 10 to 20 months of the project that much. It'll all work out. The prior 10 to 20 months all works. It's the last 30 days that everybody needs to commit to. So we get the group together. We put pressure on the GC through the owner, because we always try to work for the owner. And we try to get all the right stakeholders in the room. And we get a good person on their scheduling software. And we go in and they say, well, we're just doing this and this. And it's simple. And we're going, well, wait a minute, that's not quite so simple. What about this? What about that? What about that? And we try to micro schedule the last set of days. And it may be that the network guys say, we'll have our fiber in, we'll have our systems available, but then it takes us X number of working days to get them turned on, and then I can allocate the IP addresses, and before I can allocate the IP addresses, you can't even make a panel work, right?
Right.
So you gotta micromanage the last 30 days of a project. So if you wanna come out of any sessions or this session, try that. Maybe it adds value to your day. That's one of our tools. And I'd be interested to know some of your, how do you solve it? So Jerry, let's start with you.
So, like you, we look very closely at the last 30 days. We're always constantly asking for schedule updates and making sure that we get those from the GC and from the architect because they have typically two different schedules. The architect's thinking one thing, the GC's thinking another. Substantial completion is in the GC's mind. We're thinking about commissioning and how do we get to there and making things operational. So we're looking at trying to make sure that if there's a move-in date and we're supposed to have everything operational, then we're stepping back from that. And how does that relate to the GC schedule, the architect schedule, and where we're going to run into problems? For example, I've got a consultant right showing up today in Kuala Lumpur. They specifically told us the door to commission, but the locks aren't in yet. So they're waiting for him to get there so he can help them. Not sure why, but that's what's happening. So we track it. We knew it, but scheduling Kuala Lumpur takes time. So we had to do that. But again, it goes back to what Ed was saying. Micro schedule the end of it so that you can better adapt to completing the project. Commissioning for us is really, the integrator has already done his installation and punch list. The punch list, that means the system should be fully operational and functional, and they are working their own punch list items off. Commissioning to me means we are working to verify and validate that everything is functioning properly.
Kind of like a final acceptance
test, if you will.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we're, at least if we can get to that punch list stage and get 99% of it up, we're in better shape. But it's all about managing that end of it. So, agreed.
I'll take a different tact on this. I agree with what Ed and Jerry say, but it begins way prior to that. It depended upon whether or not you have a strong project manager. And whether or not, well, at least with the projects that we do, it's you have set times, set schedules on when you're going to meet, and it's done on a regular basis, if not weekly, every bi-weekly. So that then when you get to the last 30 days, you're not caught by surprise by certain things. Now, are certain things going to happen? They do.
Right.
So you just have to adjust for that. But it's also going back to Sarah's question in terms of, well, if we have all these issues, well, does the project manager, and is it a strong project manager? Do they know exactly what's going on, and has that been communicated to all the various trades as well as who's part of that team effectively? Because typically, if you've got a good project manager, that will all be known, and there won't be gaps in a lot of the communication pieces, at least not in my experience. Now, again, it's dependent on who you get. There are people who are very good at process-oriented project management aspects, and there are people who are not. They'll say they're project managers, but when you get to commissioning and testing and everything else, you're nowhere near there. And that's because of a communication piece. So from a very simplistic sense, who do you have running your project, not only from your side of the business, but also from the client side and the general contractor side? Because there's going to be many project managers involved. Who's going to lead on your side, but you're having that meeting on a consistent basis, and you're ensuring that you're hitting not only your milestones, but also products coming in when it's supposed to. You're going to be able to slap it up quickly, and then it's a budgetary thing. Are you keeping track of your costs? So for me, it's always been the project manager and keeping them on task from a client perspective.
So Kelly, do you, when you're working with them, do you provide them with objectives relative to the project management piece and/or any tools relating to how you expect to get that feedback and that sort of thing?
So I'm sure we all do this, but at the beginning of any of our projects, we have obviously the kickoff meeting, and then everybody gets assigned on what the roles and responsibilities are. Now we put into what's called a playbook. And you're going to follow the playbook, just like a football team or a security team doing executive protection. But then what we do differently is everyone's going to sign off on this, and you're going to be held accountable and responsible. So it's not so much a technology tool, so to speak, but it's actually a sheet that you're going to use and as part of that project plan. And we're going to follow this plan according to how project management should be done. And it's going to hit your milestones. Now, you can use various types of project management software to keep you in. There's ones online. Microsoft has some. There's other. I actually use Zoho, which is a CRM tool, but they have a great project management feature and just keeps everybody updated with what's going on. Now, is it physically possible to have everybody in one room all the time? No, it's not. But as long as you're hitting those checks, and then you can record that, document it, like Jerry says, document, then you're covered along the way of the project. But our biggest thing, like I said, is establishing that plan, establishing the expectations, making sure they're held accountable and responsible for what they're going to do, and then regularly updated aspects of where we're going.
Brad.
The analogy of the red zone offense or 2-minute drill, I like, but I also find that the halftime huddle is important too, because back to the velocity, I mean, we got to stop for a moment and say, look how fast things are being constructed.
Right.
I mean, this is modular construction. What we see in again, in our space, I mean, they built Levi Stadium in record time. There was a big incentive. They built it in 4 sections and bolted it together. And that's how they're doing many of the stadiums today, depending on exactly how that works in some of the, we don't do stadiums because those are pretty high risk, but and you have to buy a box. It costs a lot of money. But you got to keep. And the general.
Strike that line.
Sorry, but no one wants. The general's not going to tell the owner, "Hey, we're behind." Right. So sometimes, and what will happen is no one wants to tell it till it's too late. Then it's like the 30-day clock, and I'm in a 2-minute drill. I can't score 4 touchdowns.
Right.
Can you just get the perimeter up? How's that, Brad? Oh, okay. You can bid it that way. Don't have all the infrastructure in place, but and 5G I think is going to change our world. I think when we really start looking at data coming from the sites. But I would encourage, if you can, as consultants, to make those periodic site visits, because with your years of industry experience, you can walk out there and say, no shit. Hell no, that's not going to be done by that. Oh, I shouldn't say we're being videotaped. Right. But you can't do it. You just can't. It's not physically possible sometimes. Yep. I've bagged and taped, just sheetrock. Follow the sheetrockers. Forget the dust and the texturing and unbag it and the crazy stuff that goes on. And the owner doesn't take no for an answer.
Right.
The owner doesn't understand either.
Right.
Did I not tell you to talk about the Redskins?
Well, I was just going to piggyback on that by saying, sometimes we work for both owner and architect, generally speaking, when we're doing projects. And when we're doing those kind of things, we have to tap dance a little bit about where we say the project is versus where they're saying the project is. And, we got to play that game. But internally, we know really where we are. We're pretty good at knowing where we are and what we can complete, when we can complete it. Through our relationships with the integrators, we can assess where we are. Now, whether or not the architect or the GC or the owner really want to admit the current position until it's too late, because they have to carry that up through their executive leadership, and no one ever wants to say that. So we just have to play the game, move it forward, anticipate some of that 2-minute drill that's coming. And again, I mean, what we said, if we can micromanage sort of that red zone piece, you can at least get most of it done.
I agree.
So the fast track job, it was a data center that we were working on. They typically, to build this size and type of data center, they would typically spend about 24 months, right? And they wanted to get it down 24 months if you're fast, you're generally fast. They wanted to do this one in 18. So they wanted to cut 6 months out of a fast track and make it a super fast track, right? And so in the design and negotiating real estate, it was better if we put all the security equipment, cabinets and things like that in basically for a major section of the data center in one room, because it was only 2 stories and we were able, and it was spatially, it worked out. It was within it was the weekend days. It was within the 500 feet, and we did have cameras out in IDFs, but we had access control coming into these one rooms. So we negotiated a particular room, and it was on the ground floor, and it was a plenty big enough room. We had lots of wall space. The electrical got us all, designed all the power. It was all there. It was a good plan. We were happy with it. And the project goes on. Well, somebody in the process neglected to tell us that as they were moving forward, they made a decision to build out the second floor first. And so I go to the project and they're sheetrocking the second floor, and I go to the first floor and it's dirt and there's a bobcat driving around. And that's where our room is. And they're going, okay, we got to turn some of these doors on. I'm going, well, wait a minute. So you never know what's going to come hit you, right? In those projects. Listen, we have about 9 minutes left. I apologize. I didn't leave much time for questions. So, Jim, questions?
Because you always have the good answers.
Yeah.
To the integrator, to everybody here, AIA once had a study that said the biggest pain in the ass was hardware, door hardware. And like 5-6 people touched that door, and ultimately the integrator gets blamed for it.
That's right.
So what is everybody's opinion on who should apply the electrical door hardware, and to what extent?
I'll answer that right off the bat. So I was working for Deloitte at the time, and I was in charge of all their physical security. And we had the issue of that very thing: scheduling of the doors, putting in the hardware, how that was going to get done, who's going to control it. So our real estate folks and our department decided right off the bat, security will handle it, all of it. And then we'll pick, on the Asa Abloy was they had a system in place where it could take care of the whole thing, and then we just had to put the door in. Given the GC didn't get their money percentage, which typically was what it is, but then it was be able to put in good timing, integrated properly with the system we were putting in place, and saved us a ton of money. So from my perspective, having gone through that experience, I always like pulling the doors away from the general contractor.
Yeah. Anybody else? I agree with that.
Well, they leave it in a box for us to install anyways, even if we weren't getting paid for it. So,
Because you'll have to go to the door 15 times if you don't need it.
yeah.
I personally think that's an all depends, okay? Because sometimes when you're building a building, okay, the infrastructure, the conduit going to that door, or however you're operating that door, the security guys are not coming in until the very end. So when I have inspections, okay, how am I going to have an inspection on the door to make sure the closer's in place, the hinges are in place, it's latching appropriately? Security guys aren't in yet. So I think it's a kind of all depends on that, and it depends on the project. If it's a brand new construction, if it's a retrofit. I've dealt with this hundreds of times, and I'm sure you guys have as well. So I don't think there is one right answer to that personally.
Agreed.
So
I agree with that.
the industry hasn't answered it yet. This question's been raised for years. Division 8, Division 28. We're still hammering that out.
We're still having that discussion.
I agree with
Intelligent
Chad.
locks.
in that.
Are there other questions?
This is a great session.
Brad, you said that technology is moving faster than some of the team members can keep up with. From a manufacturing side, what's the best format to put out training on rapidly moving technology that is accessible to your team, both consulting, integration, and even end users? What would that look like as opposed to figuring it out? We don't write manuals anymore, really, with cloud. So what would be the best utilization of technology that we could provide for training?
I would answer that with, the manufacturing community is, and I want to say, don't take this out of context, but we've got to train each other. I mean, there's a huge void called training and knowledge base. So, whether I'm studying for a PSP or a CPP or something else, or CSPMs, a lot of that is online recording now. Like CSPM's just rolling out another one. We're putting a lot of our young professionals in where they can sit interactively into the session or do it at their leisure. Everything's being recorded. But you've got to test out somewhere, I believe, And you've got to make it convenient. People are driving far distances on the road, the construction. They want to make from an integrator, the engineers want to be with the soccer teams, and you get all that. So you got to do it in a way that, so how you deliver the content, I think that's the easy part. As an integrator, I've got to pay now, which is okay, to come in as an employee and sit down and we're going to train you. And take this time to train.
Yeah, okay, so that's an interesting answer. I'm going to give this to John, then I have a comment too.
Thanks, Ed. Great job to Ed and the panel today, first of all. You know, Sarah brings up an interesting point, and the one thing that we haven't touched a lot on is estimating, right? And everything the integrator does when a specification comes out is built around estimating. We all follow the same percentages of estimating. So when jobs go from 1 year to 10 years, that project manager is still at those weekly job meetings, but we only estimated that for 52 weeks, not for 520 weeks. So budget starts to come into play, percent of complete billings. Now back to Sarah's point of training. Well, we look at everything in efficiency in the integration world. What percent efficiency can we get out of our project managers? That's billable time, much like everybody in this room. All the consultants are looking at billable hours. So each training session, multiple products, certifications.
75% is the number we use, efficiency, productivity.
Right, and then we talk about loaded rates, and that's where all that starts to come into pack. So I'd like to hear the panel's opinion on labor efficiencies.
Or are we in the city? Do I pay for $60 a day parking? Do I have the parts dropped off?
What part of the country?
Yeah, I think when we're building budgets, top or bottom up, whatever you want to do, I look at efficiencies at 75%. And I track at GPS, Geotab, whatever you want to do. It's hard and the labor costs. So I'm constantly battling that, John. And Nika, there's people out there, and then Jim could chime in here and see if there's a secret recipe somewhere. But it really does depend, I think, on a lot of these questions. But I strive to run a business, a $50 million business, strive to run, and what efficiency or productivity you get out of them. I think a good turnover is probably worth 3 points to the bottom line. If you really set those expectations beyond the kickoff meeting, and you start to put that accountability, and it's not just a teaming environment, but I think the inception to setting the expectation is probably 3% to the integrator, if I do it right.
Is that 75% part? How do you
so I'm saying I'm billing my PM 75% of the time. I'm already assuming that other 25%, I've got to keep them trained, got to have them go to meetings I'm not going to recover costs from, that is, I'm going to get it on the next job.
To Sarah's point, training, right? I think in our environment today, given the speed, the process, the things that are going on, the more that we can create small modules that will get us over this hump and then the next hump and just define them, the more that we have that available, the easier it is to do it at 11 o'clock at night, or you had your 3 turns. I've only got a minute left. So, are there any other questions out? Other folks? Okay, you get your last, but it's short.
With the training piece,
from an integrator side, having been an integrator, you're running guys 60 hours a week, right? 40, you got overtime, you got projects, you got service calls. Is there, for the manufacturer side, everybody's got a specific thing. So if you're carrying 400 different products, you can't send somebody to 400 different classes.
Right.
So there's some generalities there, right? If we're doing cloud, so this may be for the SIA guys or other stuff, is there a way to create a training that says, here's base level cloud, and then everybody gets a little more specific from there?
I mean, if you all remember the old Kazi Resco.
What's that?
Just hold on though. They had one of the best training programs with understanding the entire process out there of anyone that I ever knew of. And the way they did it, quite frankly, in my humble opinion, was a good way of training folks. Now, it's also upon us to hit on the ASISs and the SIAs and all the other associations who are kind of responsible for bringing us together. What kind of training modules can they give us? But also, what can we feed them? in terms of manufacturers? What can you give them as
So-
well as integrators? What can you give?
So I got to cut this meeting off, but I have a little lobbying quick, it's 30 seconds. So I've been talking to ASEA a little bit, and maybe I'll finally get off the dime and do something I said I was going to do a year ago. And so we're talking about potentially at the low level, bringing that level of the training and getting that going in a way that's much more flexible than it is today. And I think if we can figure that out and we can get the right contributions into that program, it'll make your life and the lives of all of us a little better. So if you want to talk to me about that, I'm here. So thanks everybody, and I really appreciate it.